we go!
And we're your hosts. I'm Diane Bortoletto.
And I'm Monique Ricciardo.
Let's do it.
Hello, and welcome to And Away We Go Formula One podcast, a podcast about Formula One, travel, food, and lifestyle surrounding the sport. I'm your host, Diane Bortoletto, a pre-Drive to Survive Formula One fan, and today I'm in Perth in Western Australia.
And I'm Monique Ricciardo, your post-Drive to Survive fan, and I'm in Stavanger in Norway. This week, we're joined by Annie Bradshaw, a freelance PR consultant who has been working in motorsport for over 50 years. She's worked for Williams, BMW Sauber, the A1 Grand Prix, Lance Stroll, the list goes on. Who hasn't she worked for?
Oh, I'm so excited to be talking to you, Annie. When I worked for a PR agency in London in the late 90s on the Orange Arrows Formula One account, your name kept coming up all the time. You know, when I was talking about my next career steps, people were like, do you know Annie Bradshaw? Maybe you should talk to Annie Bradshaw. So I'm so excited to have you on the podcast. Welcome, Annie.
Thank you very much. Warm welcome from a very cold UK, but thank you very much for inviting me. I'm looking forward to chatting to both of you.
Well, Annie, you've had a really long and esteemed career in Formula One and motorsport in general. Tell us how you got into motorsport.
Well, it was a family passion. I come from a family of motorsport fans. My brother used to do some rallying. You know, ever since I was a child, I remember being dragged to blustery racetracks in the UK and to stand on corners for hours and watch these guys go right round. And I loved it. Started at a very early age, and friends in the business. And by profession, I'm a journalist. I got lucky that a friend rang me one day and said, oh, my ex-girlfriend's boss needs somebody to work for him. He was involved in a race organising club. So had a chat with him, and that was 1971, and I'm still here now.
Wow,
fantastic.
That is absolutely incredible. And can I ask, obviously back in the 70s, motorsport would have been, I mean, it's still quite a male-dominated arena. So back in the 70s, what was that like entering the motorsport world as obviously as a female?
It's one of those situations that, like, you know, it's only recently with the sort of emergence of, you know, we must get a female into F1 and very much diversity, inclusivity on every level, that I really thought about it. And to be honest with you, then I didn't think about it. You know, I love the sport. Okay, you know, there weren't many of us around, many females, but I never came across any misogyny or anybody saying, oh, you're a female, you can't do this. So yeah, it was, you know, it wasn't something that really stuck in my mind that, oh, I'm the only female here. You know, it was, I'm doing a job. There's lots of men around me. They all look after me. They all treat me well. So what's to complain about?
Perfect.
Yeah, because Di, what was your experience?
Oh, look, for me, I was in an agency. So the team was women in the agency. And then when I worked for Rally Australia, the marketing team, which I was a part of, was, again, mostly women. Everyone else, all the organising committee, they were all men except for two. And then as you go further down the chain, it was just all men, but pretty good, really.
Yeah, I remember way back to 85 when it was first Grand Prix in Australia in Adelaide. And I went over there and helped run the media centre. They were looking, you know, I got recommended. They needed somebody who knew how to do it. And I'd been doing the British Grand Prix. And I went over there. And in fact, the agency I worked with were mainly females. It was an agency called, I think it was Fox PR. And they were based in Melbourne. And they were females. So that was the first time I'd come across a gang of females working together in the sport. It started quite a while back.
Wow.
And what was it like working for a brand new Grand Prix, like the Adelaide Grand Prix? I can imagine, especially the first one, there would have been so many things that go wrong, so many things that the team wouldn't have known how to handle. But, you know, what was it like back then?
It was amazing. I mean, we were a lovely group of people. And I remember John Bannon, who was the premier then of that area, and he was so positive about it and such a great advocate of, we've got to get this Grand Prix here. I had the best time. In fact, I remember I didn't want to go home. And so in the end, one of the girls who I worked with at Fox PR, she said, well, stay in a bit longer, we'll take you to the Melbourne Cup. So, you know, I didn't want to leave Australia after that. But no, it was a great experience. The enthusiasm. I mean, to be honest with you, none of us knew where Adelaide was. We had to get a map and look it up. From the moment you got off the plane to the moment you went back, it was party time. It was absolutely fantastic.
How does that compare to the British Grand Prix? Was the British Grand Prix a party time as well? Was everybody happy, or what was it like?
It was a little more serious. I mean, for a start, the British Grand Prix, we didn't have koalas sitting in cars and things like that. Yeah, I mean, the British Grand Prix is amazing because of the atmosphere, the fans. In a way, I have to say it's old school because it is about the racing. And I mean, Adelaide, I think I might be wrong, but I think they were one of the first to actually come up with the idea of having a concert after the race to keep the fans happy. And Paul Simon, some really serious people there coming around into the garages. And we also always had those celebrity races, which were great. I mean, people like Elle Macpherson would come and do that, Clive James, Dame Edna. I mean, the best thing ever was meeting Dame Edna in her various guises. One of the most amazing times of my life, putting Dame Edna in Damon Hill's car and not being able to get her out because she got stuck.
Dame Edna is quite imposing.
Yeah, and poor Robbie, the mechanic on that car. I wish in those days we'd had cameras with videos on because I would love a video of him pulling her out.
That would have been quite a sight, I can imagine.
I'd love to see that video as well. Oh my goodness. Annie, you've got a really interesting story from the end of 1994. Tell us everything.
Yeah, well, that was perhaps the most difficult year, but just getting to Australia at the end of the year is always such a relief. It's sort of party time and everybody's sort of decompressing. Damon had had a tough year, so off he went, and he arrived at the race having been holidaying for a few days with a couple of his friends who I never trusted. They were the naughtiest people in the world, and they were George Harrison and Barry Sheene.
As in George Harrison, Beatles George Harrison?
Beatles George Harrison, yes. I mean, they're both great fans of Damon's and great friends. I mean, I'd known Barry an awful long time, and Barry and myself he'd ring me every so often, and he'd always call me Fran for some reason. He said, I just felt that was your name, but lovely guy. And so they went off partying and they came back, and then it all got quite tense. So George came to me and said, Anne, I can tell you the karma's wrong in the garage. I said, what do you mean? Well, it's all tense because he could win it. So we've got to get the karma right. So I said, all right. So he said, well, what I'm suggesting we do, he said, if we could just shut all the garage doors and we could all just get on the floor and chant, that would help.
What?
Oh my God.
So I said, I don't think Frank will approve of that. I said, I just don't think, no. He said, oh, righto. So off he went. No, just not, wasn't upset. So the next day I knew he was walking around the garage with all the fruit he could find in the catering area, putting it everywhere and sticking joss sticks in and lighting it.
As in incense. Oh my goodness.
All I can think of is it George Harrison that sings, oh my Lord, my
sweet Lord. Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm just thinking of that song and incense sticks and chanting on the ground.
Yeah. I mean, they were so funny, and they were in the garage watching the TV when it all went wrong, and they were going berserk. I've never seen two fans so excitable and so annoyed. That was they were great fun to have around.
What actually happened in the racing?
Well, Schumacher went off. Damon would have gone by and won the race and the championship. But Schumacher then came back on the track and hit Damon and damaged his front suspension. And then he came in and, he had to retire from the race. If Schumacher hadn't come back on the track, and everybody reckoned he did it on purpose, and there was a big furore about it. But he came back and hit him. And
who won the championship?
Schumacher.
So he took Damon Hill out to stop Damon Hill winning the 1994 championship so he could win the... Wow.
I remember seeing this in the Schumacher documentary. They talk about this particular race because obviously Schumacher didn't always play nice. He wasn't exactly, he was hungry. Max Verstappen does the same thing now.
Yeah.
When you're hungry for it, you will do what it takes. We've seen some good bingles, but that is the ultimate dirty move. Oh my God.
Wow.
Maybe George should have been chanting on the grounds for Damon.
What a great story. Thank you for sharing that one with us, Annie.
Some of the things you must have seen from spending so many years, and I guess in the PR world, you do get to do all these fun kinds of activations. Are there any that really stick out in your mind as something that you're so proud of doing in your career?
I mean, these days, they don't do what we used to do. I mean, there would be quite big launches. It wasn't a Formula One launch, but I know one that I was involved in where it was a touring car, and we actually got the guy who was driving it, who was also a helicopter pilot. We got him to pick his car up and fly it down the Thames. But unfortunately, there was about a force 10 gale at the time. So this car was swinging backwards and forwards as he was flying down the Thames, plonking in the hotel that we were doing it in. Luckily, he was a pilot who used to take people out to oil rigs. So he knew about bad weather.
Mm-hmm. And with my PR hat on, every time there's a stunt like that, in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, please don't let me have to enact the crisis comms plan. With the same thoughts going through your head, like, God, what's the headline of this media release going to be? You know, when you see sort of hairy situations like that.
I mean, but there can be little things that go wrong. I remember BMW Sauber days, we were doing a launch in Munich in the headquarters, and we were doing all the filming the night before and all the photography. And we just finished it, and then somebody realised that the BMW badge that was on all the drivers' overalls, somebody had done it the wrong way round, so the blue and the white were in the wrong position.
And it just ruins absolutely everything.
They had to then spend all night getting new overalls and things like that. Yeah, and luckily we had a bit of Photoshop then, so some of that could be done, but some of it, the filming couldn't, but that was entertaining.
Having been in the industry for this amount of time that you have, how has your job changed with the advent of social media in particular and technology? Like, what was it like back in the 70s versus now?
It's changed out of all recognition. I mean, like you two were saying, pre and post Netflix, Drive to Survive, but also pre and post social media, because nobody was so aware of the power of the media then. You know, we didn't have millions of people worldwide watching it live. Obviously, the newspapers, they sent their motor racing representatives along, but we were back page stories. It changed when we went from being back page to front page. And it was James Hunt's wife running off with Richard Burton that started that. That was the first time I remember seeing a motor racing story on the front page of the papers.
Wow.
James Hunt was obviously his personality. He seemed like a playboy himself. So to have his wife be the headline, that's...
Yeah, but that's right. Yes, Susie, she ran off with Richard Burton. And I mean, nowadays, obviously, people like Lewis, he's everywhere. He's a fashion icon. He's into his music, which is lovely. I like the fact that they're not one-dimensional, that they do other things. But that was a big change. And to say social media, well, nobody can get away with anything. I mean, the things that we used to get up to. And I'm sad that I didn't have a camera with me, but I'm pleased that they weren't, because we weren't inhibited and the drivers weren't inhibited.
Yeah, the Rally Australia after parties, because that World Rally Championship event was the last in the calendar, and the after party in Perth was wild. Thank God there was no video phones. The Sheraton Hotel where the party was held had to repaint after. When you had news to distribute at a Grand Prix, like before the age of the internet, would you print off media releases and physically hand them out to journalists in the media centre? How did you physically get news out there?
I wrote a press release, I photocopied it, and I walked around the media centre putting it on the desk. And then at the end of the event, we needed to get the story out further. And we had a telex machine. It was walking to somebody and giving them the press release.
See, in my head, this doesn't compute, because basically my entire career, I have known the internet and worked with the internet. I mean, I am old enough that I remember not having the internet, but, you know, I was primary school then. So my entire career, I've known having the internet. How did you get pressing information out ASAP? It's not breaking news like it is nowadays, is it?
Breaking news happened when the magazines came out on Thursday. That was breaking news. I mean, Autosport magazine, we all used to wait for Thursday to read it, and, you know, being absolutely glued to it. I worked for Autosport for 3 years, so I know you'd go on an event, you'd come back, you'd write your story, you'd send it to the printers, and then Thursday you'd sell 50, 60, 70,000 copies of the magazine.
Wow.
These days, we're so used to that immediacy, right?
Yeah.
Something happens and it's online in minutes.
It's on their social media.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you should talk to one of the photographers about how they'd take the photos and they'd go scour the paddock looking to see if any team manager, anybody, a team principal was flying home early. And those guys would carry their films home for them to get them developed, and people would meet them at the airport. I mean, a number of times they'd come and say, oh, you know, when's Frank leaving? And they'd take them back, and then they'd have to fly back and spend a Monday in a dark room.
Yeah.
And now they just sit at their desk, download this and whiz it off.
I just learnt actually that every team has a photographer trackside that takes photos of the tyres of every single competitor that's fed back to headquarters. And there's analysts there looking at every tyre of every car on every lap to check the degradation. And then they make pit stop calls and tyre calls and amend their strategy depending on what other team's tyre deg is doing compared to their team.
That's how they do it.
It's amazing. The technology is just amazing, but it's really changed a lot in the last few decades for sure.
Yeah. I mean, we've always had photographers going out doing sneak photos of other teams. Send him down to so-and-so and see if you can get that. And, sort of. Yep. So that's always happened. But yeah, I mean, there's nothing that happens now on track that isn't recorded in one way or another.
You're still a freelance PR, so you're still in the game, so to speak. Are half the media team still in the factory working from there, or are they all at the track?
In my day, it was me. I was the press officer. I was one person doing press and one person doing marketing. Nowadays, a marketing and a media department, they're now very separate. A marketing department can be hundreds of people. A media team, you can have, I don't know, with content creators, the people who are looking after the sponsors, you can have 20 or 30 people. They will take perhaps 4 or 5, perhaps more people to a race. Also these days with 24 races, nobody wants to do 24 races. So there's always somebody left behind. They will take quite a number of people, but they've got just as many, if not 3 or 4 times as many back at the factory.
Yeah, right. Wow.
Obviously, there is a difference between doing PR for a team, doing PR for an agency that works with teams, works with the racers. What's it like? Because I know you were doing PR for Lance Stroll. So what's it like taking on a singular driver? What does that involve compared to all the other ways that you can do PR in Formula One?
Obviously, when you're concentrating on one person, you're only worrying about the way they deal with the media. And it's just a matter of making sure that you make the right decisions of who they should be talking to, who they should do interviews with, how they're perceived, telling them the pitfalls. Yeah, it's a bit like being a school teacher, isn't it? You've got kids and you have to look after them. And you have to tell them what to do and what not to do.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't always listen to you. You have to look at it one-dimensionally, not as an overall thing. But then you have to say, but this is what the team is saying, so don't say anything that's contrary to what the team is saying. And I had a problem with Lance, but I had a problem with the media that he was a billionaire's son. The perception of what your driver is or how he is, you then have to work with the media to say, this is your perception, but this is the real person. And that was a challenge because, Lance, it's not his fault who's his father. Okay, his father could afford to help him to go racing, but people then forgot to look at him as a racing driver. They looked at him as a billionaire son, which was sad. He's a nice person. And to this day, I'll always defend him and say he's not the worst driver out there. Okay, he's not Lewis Hamilton, but he was very unfairly criticised by other racing drivers. I just don't understand why they just didn't give him a little bit more slack.
Yeah. I related to Lance the most when he broke, did he break his arm or something and then continued to race? And having Fernando Alonso come out and also defend him and say, what a champion. He was in so much pain. And he got quite a good result that race as well from memory. I don't know. My respect for Lance Stroll just went up exponentially after that race weekend.
And the way that he's managed to continue to show up and just
get on with it.
Yeah, get on with it and not be inflammatory in any way. I mean, this is probably largely down to what their PRs tell them to do as well.
Good advice. Yeah.
He just got on with it. He didn't make a big deal of what media was saying about him or anything. And in today's day and age of social media and the influence that drivers can have on brands, on their audience, personal PR is so important for these drivers. I mean, look at Daniel Ricciardo, look at Valtteri Bottas, who has a personal brand now. Personal brand is so important.
They're all a brand. They're not a racing driver, they're a brand. I mean, you say Valtteri Bottas is just, he's become a total hero. I mean, he's always been the nicest person, but everybody loves him now because he laughed at himself, but he actually knows how to position himself. So, it's good.
Yeah, he's Australian now, by the way.
Speaking of Australians and media, we all remember a slight little bungle that might have happened with a current Australian driver and team announcements when it was announced that Alpine that announced signing Oscar Piastri, and Piastri was like, no, this is not happening.
Oh, yeah, gosh.
As a PR professional, what sort of calamity was that? How do you deal with that? What's your kind of take on these kind of crisis comms situations?
Yeah. I mean, as we know, there's always two sides to every story as well. I'm very, very good friends with Anne Webber. And obviously Mark's his manager. So not long after that, I did have quite a long lunch with Anne, and I learned a little more. And knowing some of the personalities involved there, yeah, I mean, it was a difficult one, and it wasn't good for anybody.
No.
But at the end of the day, a driver has to defend what they think is right and go where they think is right for them. And obviously that proved correct, that where Mark wanted Oscar to go, and where Oscar wanted to go, was without doubt the right move. I don't think these public spats do any good for motorsport, because people look at it and they, spoiled rich kids sort of thing. And that's a fact of life. It's the same if you're a footballer. If you're perceived to be rich, earn a lot of money out of what you're doing, and then there's a sort of a public spat, it's not the worst thing that's happened in the world, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good for the sport. And I have to say that I don't know Oscar. I've never met Oscar, but I have such admiration for the way that young guy kept his head, didn't let any of it, well, mind you, Mark Webber wouldn't let it go to his head. But yeah, Mark and Anna are amazing people. And I just have such respect for the way they looked after him. He dealt with it, and he came out of there without ever being petulant or saying they did this, they did that, just got on with it and let his driving do the talking. I mean, you've got a future world champion there, without doubt.
Yeah, we can't wait for the day. We can't wait for the day. And it better be a public holiday when that happens, or there'll be a riot in Australia.
You've waited a while.
Exactly, since 1980.
I mean, it's not just your driving skills, it's the way you mentally deal with it. Yeah, it's a high pressure sport, and if you let little things get to you, what's going to happen when the big things get to you?
Yeah, exactly. And I just think that, exactly like you said, Anne, he's conducted himself so well. Like, from that moment, he pretty much just kept his head down and just got on with it. And now, well, not now, but in more recent times, you're seeing more and more personality come through, and his really dry sense of humor, which is just hilarious. And it's been really, really great to watch Oscar develop as a driver and as a personality.
Yeah, I mean, he had a difficult act to follow personality-wise with Danny Rick. We all know
totally.
I mean, follow that boy, because...
But that's another question I'd love to ask you. Daniel Ricciardo's last race, and how there was no announcement, from AlphaTauri or RB that he was leaving, that everybody knew he was leaving, but it was not said, not made official. And when they did announce it, which was like a week later, within the hour, they announced their new driver.
Nothing like that happens by chance. They all have a plan. I mean, I've been with a team who had a plan that was in place for a long time. And I think it was sad, because Danny Rick's a great driver, but I'm going to have to put it out there now. He was their employee. And they decided that they didn't want him as their employee for their own reasons. If it was just a pure business thing and you hadn't got all the publicity, well, yeah, I prefer him to you. So yeah, here's your cards. It was unfortunate that such a lovely person, such a great person should be treated that way, but he hadn't been performing.
Oh, it's just the way that how the team handled the announcement.
Yeah, that's awful to say it, but top of their list was getting somebody in that car that they thought would perform that way. I mean, I agree with you. I think it was dealt with. I think RB perhaps they were doing as they were told, because they are like the junior Red Bull team. So I think that there is a bigger Red Bull picture.
You, as a fan and someone that knows Daniel Ricciardo and his personality, it's disappointing for that person to see how it was done. But from the PR business point of view, it's nothing unusual.
It's nothing unusual. I mean, look back to when I was at Williams and Damon left, and some of the Nigel Mansell things. Unfortunately, that's business, and this is business in the public eye. It's all PR, and it's all the media feeding the frenzy of, will he, won't he? And that was the way the team...
Well, it's the way they decided to handle it, and, not everyone agrees, and it's all done now, but yeah.
Because we all loved him. When you ask people who your favourite driver was, he's top of the list, because he was just such a nice... I mean, one of my great moments was being driven round in a Aston Martin, the Cota, in the wet by Danny Rick on a hot lap. It's one of the best things in my life.
I can understand why. That would be so much fun.
It was fun being with him. He was lovely. It was just a friend of mine, Aston Martin. She got this for a friend of mine, and he couldn't make it to the track. I said, well, I'll put you in the car. I mean, it was a bit embarrassing because there I was in Williams gear and I'd been put in an Aston Martin.
When you get a chance like that, you can't say no, can you?
Yeah, I don't think there was one bit of the track where we were pointing the right direction. It was magic.
Changing tack a little bit here, I wanted to ask you about back in 1994 when you were working for Williams and that tragic day where there was an accident and Ayrton Senna died. Obviously, you're working for the team and he's one of your drivers. You're dealing with that tragedy personally as well. How did you work through that and be able to also do your job and give the media what they needed to run their stories when one of the biggest names in the sport that the sport's ever had when tragedy strikes? How did you handle that?
Yeah, we all are aware that it's a dangerous sport and we all have crisis plans and things like that, but you never want or envisage using them. You know you have to have them. The whole weekend was a shock. But yeah, it's one of those situations that you have to almost separate yourself from your PR person to your personal thing. And Frank Williams was a very unemotional man. He'd been through a lot personally and with drivers and that. And the best piece of advice he gave me, because he called us in and we were honest about what was the situation. And he just said, look, if you think you're going to cry, put your sunglasses on.
Wow.
And it was the best piece of advice. The trouble was there was so much happening. We were surrounded by people. The whole thing was surreal. But you just had to do that. You had to almost do an out of body experience and say, right, this is what I got in my crisis plan. You know it off by heart. But you weren't doing it by yourself. It wasn't a one-off. But there was times when you had to make a decision. You had to talk to the media. I mean, everybody was in shock. So yeah, it just was a matter of, right, this is something I have to do. I have to put my own personal thoughts to one side and deal with them at another time and in another way.
Yeah, you're a true pro, Annie. I've dealt with the fatality in motorsport as well in a safari event, like a mini Dakar, if you like, through Western Australia. And obviously not with a driver, a media profile, not even close, but still a very popular driver within the bivouac and within the sport who'd done every single event. And it's really hard. So that's why I asked that question. It's really hard to deal with. But yeah, you just kind of have to, all right, I'm going to cry between 3 and 4 because I've got nothing else on. And the rest of the time I'm going to.
Yeah. And there are drivers who's doing what they wanted to do.
Exactly.
But they are a son, a brother, a father, whatever. They are also a human being. So, it's difficult.
Yeah. I had one driver say to me, Di, if it was safe, if it wasn't dangerous, none of us would do this. It's the danger that makes this exciting. I suppose that gave me a little bit of peace knowing that they're doing what they loved.
If you turn to them and say, oh, it's dangerous, don't drive today, they'd say, are you mad? This is what kept them going. That's what they get up in the morning for.
Yeah, they were prepared to put their life on the line, for the win, for the championship. So the final 3 questions, Annie, the questions that we try to ask every one of our guests when they come on the podcast. If you could travel for a holiday to any Formula One race destination, race week or not, current or not, what would you choose and why?
Many years ago, I went to Phoenix, Arizona for a couple of races. And it was perhaps one of the worst tracks ever. It was atrocious. I mean, it was just right, up and left. It was a dreadful street track. And it was the hottest. It was 100 degrees and everything was melting. But I just loved the Sahara Desert. And I actually did go back. And I actually went back and had a fortnight's holiday in the area of Phoenix and Tucson.
Oh, wow.
The Grand Canyon. And so nowadays I want to go and explore more of the Middle East. I've been going to Abu Dhabi since their first race. I've been to Qatar a couple of times. I've been to Saudi a couple of times. The people have been lovely. And I just find it fascinating. And I really want to go and explore more. As I say, I want to go up into the desert in Saudi and in Qatar and UAE.
Getting a desert theme here with you, Annie. It sounds like you love the desert.
I love desert. My favourite plants are cacti. I love desert sunset. I don't want it to rain. I've got plenty of that here.
I actually went to the Qatari Grand Prix this year, and that was my first taste of the Middle East. And I have to say, I am like you now. I want to explore the Middle East. It's just so all-consuming, and
Yeah.
Oh, I can't even describe the feeling you get.
So different to our culture as well. I mean, I love Middle Eastern food. It's got to be, after Italian food, which of course I'm totally biased, is the best. Middle Eastern food would be my second favorite cuisine in the world. It's just so good.
Yeah, I think it gets a bad rap, that part of the world. But then you go there and you take people on face value. And I've made some lovely friends in all three places. Mind you, Qatar this year was really lovely compared to last year, because last year it was so hot, everybody was fainting. I mean, every time we came out of the media centre, my glasses would fog up. It was quite edgy. I never took the jacket off.
Pretty sure all the merch tents sold out of their jackets and jumpers on the first day because it was so cold and nobody was expecting it to be that cold.
I can go, I can go to all sorts of lovely places in the States, in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, which are lovely. But it's a similar culture to mine. I want to go and feel a very different culture and a different way of life and see how it goes and wonder why they ever want F1 there.
If you could holiday with any Formula One driver, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Oh my gosh. Oh, it'd be much easier if you said who I didn't want to holiday with.
Who would that be?
My lips are sealed. Sebastian Vettel is one of my favourite people. I loved working with him. Just the nicest man. I just think he's great fun. He's got a great sense of humour because his mother-in-law is English and taught him the English sense of humour. I mean, when I worked with him, he loved all our programmes like Little Britain and Fawlty Towers. And he's a great Beatles fan as well. So I think all of them would be fun. Some of them would be very dangerous to have a holiday with.
Yeah, I'm sure.
Finally, if you were to cook an F1 themed meal, so the cuisine of any Formula One race destination, what would you cook and why?
Right. Now, I'm not the best cook in the world. But the food I cook all the time is Indian food because I love Indian food. But if you're thinking of F1 themed, well, it would be buffalo chicken wings from America because my favorite restaurant in the world is Hooters.
Oh my God, I love that.
I got Lance Stroll to go to Hooters. He found out about Hooters. I love Hooters. I love Hooters buffalo, the really spicy chicken wings. In the American and in the UK, there's different names. One's called 3 Mile Island and one's 911. But that's the sort of hottest chicken wings. And so, yeah, it would be buffalo chicken wings, but nobody does them better than Hooters.
And on that note, I just want to say thank you so much, Annie Bradshaw, for joining us on And Away We Go F1 podcast. Shout out to Robbie Van Leeuwen, who introduced us.
Thank you so much for joining us, Annie, and thank you to our audience for listening. If you enjoy our podcast, please rate and review us on your favorite podcast listening app. If you have any questions, comments, feedback, or suggestions, please email us at andawaywegofnpodcast@gmail.com. You can also follow us on Instagram and TikTok at andawaywegofnpodcast and join the discussion on our Facebook group, again, And Away We Go F1 Podcast. We'll leave all the links in our show notes.
Thank you, Annie. Thank you, Mon. And thank you for having us in your ears. Until next week and until lights out.
It's lights out and away we go.
And Away We Go podcast is produced by Diane Bortoletto and Monique Ciccato.
Let's do it.